just, what's the game plan? What's the game plan to try to help them, the people that need help that are on the street?
Here, Eli Arnold, your turn.
Yeah, I've worked as a bike cop downtown for the last 7 years, and so I spend more of my time with homeless people than I do really with my own family. And, I know homeless people who've died this year, and more will die, in the next 6 months. There's a systemic side to this problem. There's also an acute side. And building housing, building safe rest villages, these are ways to treat the long-term problem. But in an emergency, we have to act differently. And the acute problem needs managing. Just because we can't solve a problem today doesn't mean we can't manage it. So within city government, the Bureau of Emergency Management and first responders are the only entities really designed with urgency in mind. And we need to use those powers and those organizations to manage camps, to manage the situation on the ground, to mitigate the harms to the homeless people, to residents in the neighborhoods, businesses, and all the rest, because just waiting for perfect solutions isn't actually kind to the people who are going to die on the street in the next 6 months.
And also a tie into the homeless issue. What is your answer to business owners who feel homelessness on city streets is impacting their ability to make a living? Eli, come back around to you.
Yeah, if you're a business owner who feels like the city's neglected you in dealing with homelessness, you're right. So I've had multiple business owners break down in tears because of what they're having to deal with. These are people who have invested their lives in our city, and they deserve some responsiveness. We have been very hands-off with dealing with this problem. We haven't really had a solution for them. And, this unregulated, unpredictable camping situation is harming everybody. So it's harming the person on the street, it's harming the business owner. Just a couple weeks ago, I had to write a mental health hold on a woman wandering the streets in front of small businesses, no pants on, non-responsive. It's not the first time I've had to do it for her. How is she supposed to, continue on with her life in this situation? How is the business she's in front of supposed to do what they need to do? We have to do something different.
Do you support fining and eventually jailing people who camp on public property when they've refused repeated offers of shelter, including the option to move into the city's temporary alternative shelter sites? Eli?
Yeah, I absolutely support it. So until we do the work of building sufficient shelter space, this is going to be a targeted intervention. And if you live in a neighborhood where you've seen maybe a giant camp or there's a problem one next to your school or something like that, this is a tool that allows us to say, we did the work, we've got a spot for you, we've got a tiny house, we have shelter, but you can't be blocking this sidewalk anymore. And if a person refuses to go along with that, we have to remove the camp. And there's lots of outs for them to not have any sort of penalty here. But if they refuse to go along with them, it's okay for us as a community to have rules, to have basic expectations about things like not blocking sidewalks or, not creating, issues like shigella downtown. So we can have rules, we can enforce them. It's a compassionate rule because it requires we offer them a good option.
City of Portland and Multnomah County support the Joint Office of Homeless Services. There's been some tension between city and county government over how money should be spent to address homelessness. Would you, as candidates, like to see the city continue its participation in the Joint Office of Homeless Services? Eli, what do you think?
Only if the Joint Office is willing to change how they're going about business. So we need much better accountability for the money we're spending. We're 9 years into this. We've never been farther from ending unsheltered homelessness. And they have wanted to only focus on housing, which, like I said earlier, is this long-term solution. But it's not enough, and we're getting farther and farther away from our goal. So if they're willing to commit to an emergency timeline to make sure that the homeless people I work with every day have something to look forward to this year, so we can actually start seeing some progress, then great. If not, then maybe time to start figuring something else out.
How are we navigating the fentanyl crisis sort of with the legislation that's been repealed, Measure 110?
State legislators recriminalized possession of small amounts of hard drugs like fentanyl in Oregon and allowed counties to implement deflection programs that went into effect on September 1st of this year. Is this enough to tackle Portland's drug crisis? If not, what changes will you push for? Is this enough? If not, what are the changes that you will push for?
Yeah, I've spent the last 2 years arresting fentanyl dealers, and I'm very glad that we've recriminalized possession. It's going to make it easier to tackle dealers. It's going to make it easier to disincentivize sort of blatant public use, and that's important. On the back end, though, I've carried out some of the initial deflections, and it's very weak. So fentanyl is a terrible drug. I talk to people constantly who are users, and I mean, I really empathize. It's got to be the hardest thing in the world to get off of it. And it is not easy enough to access treatment. And even if you have easy access to treatment, people need a push. I've got a very close friend who had a terrible drug addiction a couple of decades ago, and it was finally mandatory treatment that got her off of methamphetamine and back to being a mom. And she's got a wonderful family and has lived a good life since then. We need to be willing to get uncomfortable and push when people really need our help. The lifespan of somebody who's using fentanyl on the sidewalk is not long enough to just wait and hope.
Next question, 40. What do you see as the most pressing public safety issue in your district, and what will you do to address that?
Yeah, we have a terrible police capacity issue. We're down to about half the number of police per capita as we had in 1995. And this sort of long slide, we got away with it for a while, but when we had a sort of spike in crime rate here a few years ago, we had nothing to cover it. And so, on a daily basis, if you watch calls come in through the Bureau of Emergency Communications, you see the systems become overwhelmed. And there are times when nobody's getting a response. And so it's terrible for the person who needs help, who's called 911. It's terrible for the officer who's attempting to address very serious needs. And it's tough. It's tough to know there's no safety net in those kind of situations. So we need to fix the police capacity issue, the number of officers we have. And on the other side, as was mentioned, a huge proportion of 911 calls are related to a very small population of unsheltered homeless people. So anything we can do to stabilize that population, to reduce their need, is going to really free up capacity.
So in this area, I feel there is a need for more affordable housing and lower taxes for average people.
What is your plan to create more affordable housing in the city of Portland? What is your plan? Eli, let's start with you.
I've heard the same thing from both the subsidized affordable housing builders and the market rate builders, and that is our permitting system is way too unpredictable, takes far too long, and it really prevents the building that we need from happening. And I think earlier we mentioned that the way we currently fund staff in permitting doesn't make sense. So we need stable staffing there based on need. We need to have aggressive targets for how long it takes to get a permit. So Boston, for instance, has a fast track program right now where some permits, they guarantee you they'll resolve it within 7 days. We don't even have targets for how long it takes. One developer recently told me he built 100 houses in Oregon City while still waiting on a permit for a duplex in Portland. So we've got to address that. And to the gentleman's point there, I think we need to do a big look at how this city is sort of funding its operations across the board. And I do hear a lot of complaints from people that they don't feel like they're getting their money's worth from their taxes.